I'm not a superstar. I'm an ass kicker. I am Brock Lesnar. That's it.
There are 10 wrestlers who found out the hard way exactly what happens when you cross Brock Lesnar, and every single one of them has a story worth telling. Brock is one of the most dominant and feared athletes in the history of professional wrestling. He is a legitimate NCAA Division I Heavyweight Champion. He became a UFC Heavyweight Champion. He has drawn more money in this industry than almost anyone who has ever laced up a pair of boots. But underneath all of that decorated success sits a very short fuse, and the wrong person with the wrong move will light it every single time. If you are watching this right now and you want to see where this countdown goes, hype this video up. Use the hype feature right now and tap that button. Show the algorithm that this one is worth watching, because we are just getting started. And then the stories only get darker and more intense as we count down toward number 1. Now, before we get into the names, you need to understand something critical about how Brock Lesnar's mind actually works. Brock is not a man who hates people randomly. He is not wandering around backstage with personal grudges against whoever looked at him wrong that morning. What he has is a very specific set of standards, and those standards are completely non-negotiable. You can think of it like 4 invisible lines drawn around everything Brock cares about. Cross one of those lines and you are going to hear about it. Cross 2 of them and Brock may never speak to you again. Cross 3 and things could escalate into something very real, very fast. The first line is safety. Brock is a real fighter. He has genuine knockout power. He has MMA training. He can actually hurt you, and he knows it. So if you are reckless with his body, if you are careless with your hands or your knees or your weapon shots in a match, he is going to respond the way a trained fighter responds. He will hit you back for real. No warning, no second chance, just a receipt. Getting a receipt from Brock Lesnar is not a gentle reminder. It is a lesson with consequences. The second line is respect for hierarchy. Brock grew up in a world where you earn your place. You do not skip the line. You do not talk bigger than your results. You do not demand a seat at the table before you have proven you belong at the table. You earn the right to be in the same conversation as him through real accomplishment, not through hype. The third line is creative efficiency. Brock does not want to take stupid risks in the ring. He does not want to perform with thumbtacks or chainsaws or props that could legitimately injure him for a match he does not believe in. He views professional wrestling as a business transaction. The job is to deliver an explosive, high-impact performance that draws an audience and collects a paycheck. The job is not to endanger your body for the sake of a moment that the crowd might forget by Tuesday. The fourth line is his brand. His name is his business, and it is one of the most valuable names in the entire industry. You do not borrow it without permission. You do not tag him on social media. You do not publicly call him out hoping to grab some attention off his name. He is not one of the boys who plays around online. He is a premium attraction, and you approach a premium attraction through the proper professional channels, or you do not approach him at all. Most people on this list cross one of those lines. A few cross 2, and when someone crosses 2 at the same time, Brock does not just get annoyed. He gets decisive. He removes that person from his world entirely, professionally and sometimes physically, and the removal tends to be permanent. The wrestling business has a long memory, but Brock's memory is longer. He does not forget. He does not revisit decisions he has already made. Once the verdict is in, it stays in. Now, when there is something else you should know before we get into the list, Brock's position in the wrestling world has shifted in recent years. Under TKO Group Holdings, the company that now runs WWE, his name has been quietly managed in a way that would have been unthinkable in the Vince McMahon era. Where Vince once handled Brock like a trusted devil, someone you had to manage carefully, but whose value always outweighed the trouble, the modern corporate approach looks more like legal risk management than personal relationship management. That shift matters. It tells you that the combustible nature of the Brock Lesnar situation has finally climbed all the way from the locker room to the boardroom. So let us walk through the 10 wrestlers who pissed him off in descending order. Number 10 to number 1. And then let us understand exactly which line each one crossed. Number 10, Hulk Hogan. If you want to understand everything about Brock Lesnar's career in a single story, start with this one. In 2002, WWE was building Brock as the future of the entire company. He was young, he was physically unlike anything the industry had seen in years, and he was legitimately one of the most talented athletes to ever walk through a WWE locker room. The smartest business decision on the planet at that moment was clear. Have the old legend pass the torch to the new beast. The problem was that Hulk Hogan did not want want to simply hand it over. Reports from that period make it clear that Hogan was hesitant to put the young Lesnar over cleanly. He wanted a finish that would protect his legendary status. He did not want to just lie down for some new kid. Honor even if that new kid was already becoming the most physically imposing athlete in the building. Hogan had spent decades protecting his image, and he was not about to stop doing that for anyone, not even the next big thing. And the frustrating part, from Brock's perspective, was that other people in the locker room could see exactly what was happening. They could see the stalling. They could see the negotiation. They could see an older legend using his political standing to slow down the very process the company needed to move forward. Brock had no patience for this. He has never had patience for wrestling politics or the ego protection games of the old guard. To him, if the business decision is obvious, you make it. You do not stall. You do not negotiate your own legacy at the expense of the company's momentum. The delays and the political maneuvering required just to get this simple match booked left Brock genuinely and visibly annoyed. Eventually, the segment was made. Brock squashed Hogan on an episode of SmackDown, and the message could not have been louder or clearer. He even applied a bear hug that left Hogan bleeding from the mouth. That image was symbolic in a way that went beyond the match itself. One era was being physically walked out of the picture by another era. The 1980s icon was making way for the 2000s beast, even if it took longer than it should have. But Brock was not just annoyed at Hogan as a person. He was annoyed at what Hogan represented, which was the idea that your past success should protect you from the present, that your old accomplishments should earn you leverage over what the business needs right now. Brock has never believed in that. He still does not. You earn your respect in the moment, or you simply do not have it. That tension, that absolute refusal to bow to legacy for its own sake, would define his career from that day forward. Hogan was just the first name on the list. He would not be the last. Number 9, Matt Hardy. Most wrestlers on this list crossed Brock and paid for it in some way. Matt Hardy crossed Brock and somehow walked away with something almost nobody else on this list managed to get: genuine respect. That is what makes this entry so different from everything else you're going to hear today. In 2002, Brock was new to the WWE locker room, but already carrying himself like he owned it. He was massive, he was talented, and he was supremely confident. Maybe too confident for some of the veterans who had been there far longer and earned their stripes in a different era. There was a feeling among some people backstage that the next big thing was acting like he had already arrived at a destination he had not yet fully reached. Matt Hardy decided to address that feeling with a steel chair. During a match, Hardy delivered a chair shot to Brock that was, even by the aggressive standards of that period in wrestling, exceptionally hard. Not a cooperative tap, not something arranged with a wink, a real full-force shot that made a sound you could feel in your chest from the back of the arena. After the match, Paul Heyman, who was Brock's manager and closest advisor at the time, went and told Matt Hardy something remarkable. He told him that the shot he had just delivered was the first real chair shot to the head that Brock Lesnar had ever taken in his entire career. Think about what that means. The most physically intimidating man in the locker room, the beast who everyone else was walking on eggshells around, and Matt Hardy had just introduced him to something he had never experienced before. And Brock respected him for it, because Brock, for all of his unpredictability and volatility, is a man who responds to courage. He does not respect fear. He does not respect people who cower around him or tiptoe through conversations to avoid upsetting him. He respects people who stand their ground and back it up with real action. Matt Hardy stood his ground with a steel chair, and that was enough. The two went on to work together without issue throughout the rest of 2002 and into 2003. But the reason this story matters in the larger context of this list is because it reveals something essential about Brock's character. He has a code. It is not always a gentle or kind code, but it is consistent. Do not be afraid of him, and he will find a way to respect you. Be afraid of him, and you will spend the rest of your career on the wrong side of that equation. Number 8, Kurt Angle. If Matt Hardy earned Brock's respect with a chair shot, Kurt Angle earned it in an empty ring in North Dakota, in a match that nobody paid to see, that almost nobody knew was even happening, and that nobody involved was going to talk about publicly for years. Around 2002 and 2003, Brock reportedly made it known in conversations backstage that he believed he could beat Kurt Angle in a real wrestling match. Not a scripted one, a legitimate, competitive grappling match between two elite athletes. This was not exactly a diplomatic thing to put out into the locker room, because Kurt Angle is an Olympic gold medalist who once won his Olympic title competing with a legitimately broken neck. He does not treat challenges to his wrestling credentials as small talk. Angle heard what Brock was saying, and instead of dismissing it or taking it to management, he did what genuine competitors do. He went to find out for himself. The two men had a backstage shoot match in an empty ring before a show. Accounts of what happened depend on who is telling the story, but Angle says he was able to take Brock down multiple times and prove who the superior amateur wrestler truly was. What nobody disputes is that the match was real, the tension was real, and both men walked out of that ring with a much clearer understanding of each other. That kind of mutual understanding is hard to build with words and easy to build with real physical competition between two people who are wired to compete. It is the language both men actually speak, and speaking it honestly, even in anger, created something that years of scripted collaboration never could. Here is what makes this different from most of the other confrontations on this list. Oh, the heat between Brock and Angle did not create a Cold War. It created fire, and fire can forge something strong. These two alpha athletes tested each other, measured each other, and what came out the other side was one of the greatest working relationships in WWE history. Their WrestleMania 19 main event is still talked about today. Their 60-minute Iron Man match on SmackDown is considered one of the best television matches ever produced. Brock was pissed off in the moment, but this is one of the rare times where being pissed off led somewhere productive. It is also a window into how Brock decides who is worth his maximum effort. When someone can actually challenge him physically, when someone can back up their words in a real way, Brock flips a switch. He becomes the greatest performer on the planet. And the problem is, most people never clear that bar. Number 7, John Cena. The year is 2012. Brock Lesnar has just returned to WWE after spending years away. This is a major moment. The prodigal beast is back, and his first match is against John Cena at a pay-per-view event called Extreme Rules. The match is brutal and one-sided for almost its entire duration. Brock dominates Cena in a way that sends a clear message. This man is on another level. The planned finish involves Cena winning through a desperate, lucky shot using a chain wrapped around his fist, connecting with an attitude adjustment onto the steel ring steps. Cena gets the pinfall, but then, crucially, the plan calls for Cena to be loaded onto a stretcher and carried out of the arena. The entire point of the stretcher is to protect the story. Yes, Cena technically won, but Brock physically destroyed him. The monster image stays intact. The foundation of Lesnar's second run in WWE is protected. Cena gets the pinfall. The referee counts 3, and then John Cena gets to his feet, not onto a stretcher, not with the help of officials. He stands up on his own, grabs a microphone, and delivers a promo to the crowd. He thanks them. He acknowledges his injury in an emotional way. He connects with the audience that loves him. Now understand what that moment looks like through Brock Lesnar's eyes. He spent the entire match, every punch, every slam, every brutal sequence, building something very specific. He was laying bricks, one on top of another, constructing the image of a beast who cannot be stopped, cannot be contained, and leaves destruction in his wake even when he loses. And then the man he just spent the whole match building that story around stands up, grabs a microphone, and has a heartfelt moment that centers himself as the hero who survived. Brock later described this as Cena going into business for himself. That phrase means choosing to prioritize your own connection with the crowd over the agreed plan. It means making a unilateral decision that changes the story without consulting your partner or management. It is one of the most serious criticisms you can level at someone in professional wrestling because the whole system runs on trust and cooperation. Backstage, Brock was reportedly furious. He trashed the dressing room. He screamed at officials. He felt that everything he had spent the match building had been undercut in under a minute by a man who could not let a storyline breathe without inserting himself back into the center of it. The tension between Cena and Lesnar lasted for years after that night. They were never close. But here is where the story gets complicated. By 2025, with John Cena going on a final farewell tour, Lesnar came back, and this time, Cena reportedly wanted Brock to look absolutely dominant, wanted to use his final chapter to elevate Brock in a way he never did back in 2012. The old heat had eventually cooled into something resembling mutual professional maturity. Two men who once clashed over ego and story found a way to do right by each other when it actually mattered. That resolution is rare on this list. Most of the heat you are going to hear today never resolved at all. Number 6, Jon Moxley. Before he was Jon Moxley in AEW, before he built an entire second career on the back of violent, boundary-pushing professional wrestling, he was Dean Ambrose in WWE. And in 2016, he was handed what should have been the defining moment of his WWE career. A street fight against Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 32 in front of over 100,000 people in Dallas, Texas. Moxley came into that match preparation period full of ideas. He had been thinking about this. He wanted the match to feel like genuine chaos, like a war that the audience would never forget. He pitched thumbtacks scattered across the ring. He pitched a chainsaw as a weapon. He pitched high-risk stunt spots that would have burned themselves into the memory of every fan watching. He wanted to steal the entire show on the biggest stage WWE had ever produced. Brock said no to every single idea. Well, you would think that format would be exactly the kind of environment where Brock could have fun. But Brock's definition of fun is very different from what Moxley was imagining. To Brock, the ideas were not exciting. They were reckless. They were what he privately called stupid gimmicks. If thumbtacks end up in your skin, that is not drama. That is a real injury that could affect your real career. If a chainsaw slips or lands wrong, the consequences are not storyline consequences. They are actual hospital consequences. Brock saw no reason to take those kinds of risks for a match he did not view as a defining moment in his own career. Moxley felt Brock was clocking in. That is the exact phrase he used afterward when he talked about this experience publicly. Showing up, doing the minimum, collecting the paycheck, and going home. For someone like Moxley, whose entire identity as a performer is built on throwing himself completely into every match regardless of the stage or the circumstances, watching a partner phone it in on the biggest show of the year felt like a genuine betrayal. The match happened. Critics were not kind to it. Fans were disappointed. Moxley was disappointed. And Brock walked away with his body intact and a very large sum of money for a short and relatively uneventful match. But here is the truth that sits underneath all of this. Brock was not entirely wrong. A performer does have the right to decide what they are and are not willing to do with their own body. He is not obligated to bleed for a match he did not believe in. The problem was not his right to say no. The problem was the complete shutdown of a partner who genuinely wanted to create something special. The refusal to meet even halfway. That is the part worth criticizing. Because when Brock shuts the door completely, it does not just affect the match. It affects the person on the other side of it, who came in with real creative energy and left with nothing. Moxley eventually left WWE and built an extraordinary career on his own terms. He became a multiple-time world champion and one of the most respected performers in the industry. He created the kind of matches he always wanted to make. He just did not get to make them with Brock Lesnar. Number 5, Kevin Owens. In March 2017, WWE held a special event at Madison Square Garden in New York City. The Garden is the most famous arena in professional wrestling. A match there carries automatic significance. The history in those walls, the standards set by decades of legendary events, means that whoever steps into that ring at MSG is expected to deliver something worthy of the venue. The match on this particular occasion was Brock Lesnar against Kevin Owens. On paper, this should have been compelling. Owens is widely regarded as one of the most complete and talented wrestlers of his generation. He is sharp in his character work, intelligent in his match construction, capable of adapting to almost any opponent, and consistently delivers performances that feel important regardless of the circumstances. He brings everything to every match. The bout lasted approximately 3 minutes. Brock won. It was a dominant squash. Reports from people on that tour indicated that Brock was unhappy with how the match went. The specific issue, according to those reports, was pacing. Kevin Owens builds his matches methodically and deliberately. He tells layered stories in the ring that develop over time. He operates in a style that was developed and refined through years of independent wrestling, where the audience rewards patience and character. It is a style that works brilliantly on most stages in most circumstances. But it was not the style Brock wanted. Brock's approach to any match is built around explosive bursts of power and aggression. He wants the pace to feel like a car accident from the opening moments. He wants impact to be immediate and overwhelming. When a match settles into a slower, more deliberate rhythm, it feels to Brock like the energy is draining out rather than building up. And a drained energy in a match with Brock Lesnar is not something he is willing to accept. The two remain professional throughout their television interactions, but the tension on that specific tour was visible to people who were paying attention. Two genuinely talented performers with incompatible working styles sharing a ring in the most famous arena on the planet, and neither one able to fully bridge the gap between them. Kevin Owens is a generational talent. That is not in question, but even generational talents can find themselves fundamentally mismatched with the very specific and very demanding requirements of performing with Brock Lesnar. And when that mismatch happens, Brock does not hide his frustration. He lets it be known. Hearn in the locker room feels it. Number 4, Shane McMahon. WrestleMania 34 in New Orleans was supposed to be a turning point. For over 2 years, WWE had been building toward a moment where Roman Reigns would finally dethrone Brock Lesnar as Universal Champion. The story had been constructed carefully. The audience had been made to wait for it. Every piece of the narrative pointed toward Reigns walking out of that arena as champion. Instead, Brock walked out still wearing the title. The match was stiff and physical and drenched in blood, and the crowd in New Orleans responded with chants that wrestlers and management never want to hear. The feeling in the arena that night was one of frustration and confusion, as if the audience had been promised promised a destination and the vehicle simply refused to arrive. When Brock came through the curtain and entered the gorilla position, he was furious. He had felt the crowd's rejection. He was aware of how the match had been received in real time, and the combination of that awareness and whatever he was feeling about the creative decisions that led to that night came out in one very significant gesture. He threw the Universal Championship belt at Vince McMahon, not handed it over, not set it down, threw it at the chairman of the company, in front of witnesses. When Brock threw it, he was not just throwing a piece of leather and metal. He was throwing everything that night had stood for, everything he felt had been mishandled, directly at the person he held responsible. It was the most Brock-shaped possible way of communicating displeasure, wordless, physical, and impossible to misinterpret. Shane McMahon was present in that same area. Shane has always been protective of his father, and watching someone throw an object at Vince in that manner was not something he was prepared to accept quietly. Shane reportedly confronted Brock directly. No punches were exchanged, but sources close to the situation indicated that Shane was genuinely ready for the confrontation to become physical. He was furious in a way that went beyond corporate concern. What makes this incident notable beyond the obvious drama of it is the aftermath. Brock re-signed with the company relatively shortly afterward, which tells you everything about the economics of the top level of professional wrestling. Even throwing a championship belt at your employer does not cost you your position when you are capable of drawing the kind of revenue that Brock Lesnar generates. But it does cost something, the kind of trust and goodwill that cannot be rebuilt simply by signing a new contract. That damage sits in a place that business transactions cannot fully reach. Number 3, Braun Strowman. The 2018 Royal Rumble featured a triple threat match for the Universal Championship involving Brock Lesnar, Kane, and Braun Strowman. At that point in his career, Strowman was being positioned as one of the most exciting emerging forces in WWE. He was raw, he was enormous, and he was generating real crowd responses every time he appeared. The company was investing in him as a cornerstone of the next era, but there is a meaningful difference between being positioned as a monster on a television program and being fully prepared for the specific and unforgiving demands of sharing a championship match with Brock Lesnar. During a sequence in that match near one of the ring corners, Strowman caught Brock with a stiff knee to the side of the head. Strowman was not trying to hurt his opponent, but a real fighter does not always have the patience to distinguish between an accident and a choice. Brock stood up from the impact. He was visibly dazed. His expression changed completely, and then he delivered a right hand to Strowman's head that, based on Brock's training and genuine physical ability, was a real strike with real force behind it. The crowd inside the arena felt something shift in that moment. The match had briefly stopped being a performance and started being something else. Brock's MMA instincts had engaged and overridden the script, and everyone in attendance could sense the difference, even if they could not name exactly what they were sensing. Strowman has talked about this incident in interviews and has consistently described it with a tone of genuine respect rather than resentment. He says he got the message immediately, and that working with Brock is a high-pressure environment where errors are simply not tolerated. That response says something important. So Strowman understood the moment for what it was. He did not take the receipt as a personal attack. He understood that it was a professional correction, because that is the honest truth of what Brock's safety standard actually means in practice. He is not trying to injure people. He is trying to make absolutely certain that he does not get injured. Those two things can look similar from the outside, but they come from completely different places. One is aggression. The other is self-preservation from a man who knows exactly how vulnerable a human body is and has no interest in finding out from personal experience. Number 2, Matt Riddle. Now we arrive at the kind of heat that does not cool down over time or eventually resolve into mutual respect. The kind that ends with a statement delivered so clearly and finally that there is simply no room left for negotiation. Matt Riddle, like Brock, came from a genuine combat sports background. He had competed in the UFC. He understood that world, and for a period of time, he apparently concluded that this shared background gave him some basis for putting Brock's name in his mouth on a public and regular basis. He called Brock out on social media. He talked about wanting to be the one who retires the beast at WrestleMania. He framed it as a dream match he was campaigning to make happen. He was loud about it and consistent about it, and he kept it going long after most people would have let it drop. From Riddle's perspective, this strategy made sense. You attach your name to a bigger name, you create conversation around a potential matchup, and you elevate yourself in the process. It is a tactic that has worked for a number of wrestlers in the social media era, and there is nothing inherently unreasonable about trying it. From Brock's perspective, it was a direct violation of his brand boundary. Riddle had not earned the right to use his name as a tool. He had not established a relationship. He had not come through any kind of professional channel. He was treating one of the most valuable names in wrestling as a free resource he could borrow whenever he wanted attention, and Brock does not hand out that resource. The situation reached a breaking point backstage backstage at the 2020 Royal Rumble. Brock approached Riddle, grabbed his shoulder to get his attention, and told him directly and without any ambiguity that he might as well stop saying his name and stop tagging him online, because the two of them would never work together. Not sometime in the future when things settle, not after some cooling off period, ever. Riddle stayed calm during the conversation. There was no explosion, no physical confrontation, just a door being shut with absolute finality. This is the most controlled and precise version of Brock being pissed off. No receipt, no furniture getting thrown, just a boundary stated with such complete clarity that there was no mistaking it. And in some ways, that quiet precision is more revealing than any of the more explosive incidents on this list, because it shows that when Brock is not operating on pure instinct, when he is thinking clearly and choosing his response deliberately, his enforcement of his own standards is just as absolute as when he is reacting in the heat of the moment. Number 1, Chris Jericho. This is the one. The incident that locker rooms still reference. The confrontation that captures everything complicated and combustible about Brock Lesnar in a single scene that lasted only a few minutes, but said everything about who he is and how he operates. SummerSlam 2016. Brock Lesnar had just completed his match against Randy Orton. The finish of that match was unlike almost anything seen in mainstream wrestling in years. Brock bloodied Orton using what wrestlers call a hard-way cut, which means legitimate, unpadded elbows delivered directly to the forehead with enough force to split the skin without any artificial assistance. The blood was real, the impact was real, and the finish had been discussed and approved ahead of time between Brock and WWE management, specifically with Vince McMahon. It was a planned creative decision, not an assault, but the brutality of the image it created was not something that had been communicated widely to the rest of the locker room. When the cameras caught what was happening to Orton's head, people backstage were alarmed. The amount of blood was significant. From a distance, without knowing the plan, it looked like a man being legitimately beaten in front of a worldwide pay-per-view audience. Chris Jericho was stationed in the gorilla position that night, watching the match from behind the curtain. Jericho and Orton were close friends. When Jericho saw the condition his friend was in, he had one urgent and completely legitimate question. Was this agreed upon, or did Brock Lesnar just genuinely assault Randy Orton on live television? When Brock walked through the curtain after the match, Jericho stepped up, and the two men went nose to nose. Jericho questioned whether the finish was planned or real, and Brock's response was not to calmly explain the situation or to acknowledge a concerned colleague. It was to dare Jericho to do something about it. Jericho did not back down. That matters enormously. This is a man who understood the size difference clearly. He understood exactly what Brock was capable of. He stood there anyway, in front of an entire locker room that was watching to see how this resolved. He did not move. The situation only came down when Triple H and Vince McMahon stepped in. McMahon reportedly had to shout at Jericho that the finish was his idea and that Jericho needed to mind his own business. That is how far it had gone. The chairman of the company personally intervening in a backstage confrontation. The heat between Brock and Jericho reportedly cooled eventually. Jericho later acknowledged that Brock is a private and all-business individual. That framing matters because Jericho is one of the sharpest and most socially intelligent people in professional wrestling. If even he ultimately arrived at a place of simply accepting how Brock operates rather than trying to change it, that should give you a genuine sense of how far outside the normal culture of this industry Brock Lesnar truly sits. And here is where all 10 of these stories land when you step back and look at them together. 10 wrestlers, 10 different crossings of 10 different lines, physical recklessness in a championship match, a social media campaign that crossed a brand boundary, a creative shutdown that drained all the energy from a once-in-a-lifetime stage, an ego clash between two legitimate Olympic-level athletes, a promo that undermined months of story building, a stylistic mismatch in the most famous arena in the world, a title belt used as a projectile, a chair shot that earned permanent respect, a stiff knee that triggered a receipt with real MMA power behind it, a veteran confrontation that required the chairman of a billion-dollar company to physically step between two grown men. Not one of those incidents came from nowhere. Every single one of them traces back to a consistent set of professional standards that Brock has carried his entire career. And the uncomfortable truth is that some of those standards are genuinely reasonable. Demanding physical safety from your opponents in a ring is not a controversial position. Expecting people to earn a place in the conversation before demanding your attention is not an outdated idea. Protecting your own body from unnecessary risk is not laziness. And yet that is only half the picture. The other half is the way those standards get enforced. Because Brock does not sit down and explain his expectations patiently. He does not create an environment where people feel safe enough to ask questions or make honest mistakes. His communication tends to come in the form of receipts, confrontations, title throws, and permanent blacklists. The standards themselves might be defensible. The method of enforcing them is where the real problem lives. And that problem has cost him relationships, creative opportunities, and ultimately his standing inside an industry that might never fully figure out what to do with a man who operates the way he does. But Brock does not just enforce those standards. He enforces them in a way that puts an entire locker room on permanent edge, where veterans are afraid to ask straightforward questions, where younger talent gets shuffled between shows to avoid accidental contact, where management has to intervene to prevent confrontations from becoming genuinely violent. That dynamic is not a healthy environment. That is a fear factory, and the man at the center of it did not even have to try to build it. He just had to exist there. And now under TKO, even that fear has a corporate cost attached. His name being managed quietly like a legal liability rather than celebrated like a returning star tells you that the business has changed in ways that even Brock's drawing power cannot override. The rules of the game have shifted around him, and for the first time in his career, the lines he has crossed may be harder to uncross than any receipt or backstage confrontation he has ever delivered. But here is the thing. Even with all of that complexity, even with every difficult incident in every locker room left walking on eggshells, you cannot honestly tell the story of professional wrestling in the modern era without Brock Lesnar occupying a central position in it. The legendary matches with Kurt Angle, the raw physical dominance that made audiences feel genuine danger, the moments that felt important because they felt real. He raised the standard of what a large performer in professional wrestling is expected to be. He forced the industry to take physical safety more seriously. He demonstrated that legitimate combat credentials translate into a different level of credibility that no amount of scripting can manufacture. Love him or hate him, agree with his methods or find them genuinely unacceptable, Brock Lesnar made professional wrestling feel like it had real consequences at a time when that quality was becoming increasingly rare. He brought actual weight to every match, every appearance, every backstage moment, every confrontation that never made it to television. And in an industry that runs entirely on the illusion of reality, bringing genuine weight is not a small thing. It is everything. Drop a comment below and tell us which one of these 10 moments surprised you the most, and which wrestler you think handled Brock the best way. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you on the next one.